So as I stated during the April budget workshop, there is no greater indicator of a child's future than his or her education, and Brevard Public Schools takes this charge incredibly seriously. Before the pandemic, we already faced a triple challenge as we prepared to enter the upcoming fiscal school year, sustaining and driving up an already high standard of learning and excellence for all of our students, tackling the unsustainable cost structure of our current self-insured health care plan, and balancing the 2021 budget needs with reduced revenue from the state. As we move, the pandemic grows. The pandemic grows our challenges as we navigate the uncertainty. As we come back to school, we will have to quickly assess where our students are both academically and, more importantly, emotionally. In order to make up lost ground, we're going to have to reach our students' hearts before we can reach their minds. In addition to our increased cost in health insurance, we also have to meet anticipated health and safety measures for our children, our teachers, other vital employees as we return back to school and work to support our children's education. We will also be navigating increased financial uncertainty as we assess the state's financial health after months of reduced tax revenue. And we will also be faced with the potential of reduced student enrollment depending on how parents feel about sending their children back to school. So I showed this slide at the last budget update, and I think it's important to take a look at it again. And you can see that the student enrollment in Brevard County continues to grow over the years. However, the Brevard Public Schools enrollment is projected to decline for the third year in a row, while the charter schools continue to grow. And an enrollment problem is a money problem for us. The negative growth compounds our financial challenges. And so the growth of 646 FTEs in charter schools equates to a transfer out of our budget of about $5 million. And as I mentioned again, these numbers are pre-COVID. These numbers were projected in January and submitted to the state in January. We still don't know what our numbers will look like the first day of school. We're hoping, the task force is doing everything they can do to make sure that the schools are ready day one and that they're safe and that we're ready for our children, because there's nothing more important than the first day of school. You only have one first day of school, and we need to be ready. They needs to be great, and it needs to be safe. So I think that we're on our way of doing that. But again, enrollment could further decline, and if that does, depending on the number of kids that don't come back to school, that could be a significant shortfall for us that we'll have to cover. And so this slide, it talks about the conference report, but I think Mr. Collins, Rick Collins, did an amazing job going over the conference report, and we did go through this at the April budget workshop. So what is different about this is since then we had a May calculation, and the May calculation bettered our starting position about 809K. And what happened is we lost some students to charter schools, and we had to make an adjustment. And we also had a slight proration, so there were some adjustments. We kind of paid forward. So you see the fourth calculation, the number is slightly less than third calculation, which gives us a larger change from the conference report, from the fourth calculation to the conference report. So we have a starting position of $15 million available for the starting of the year. But when we go to the next slide, the news doesn't stay that good. So we start off with the $15 million, and then we have to subtract out our categoricals or our non-restricted items if you're an accountant and you use the simple language of restricted items. So we subtract that out, and then we have the net funds available of $9.1 million. Then we have the charter school growth that we have to transfer out. And then we also have the increase to Florida retirement employee rate of $5.1 million. So that leaves us at a shortfall starting from the conference report at $1.2 million. And as Mr. Collins referred to, the conference report, in April I told you it wasn't signed by the governor, and today it is still not signed by the governor. And the budget is expected to be delivered to the governor soon. But the longer, I have a note here that says 14-day countdown. We have 14 days till we get to the next fiscal year. So most likely we will be going into the next fiscal year with this budget. Okay. So healthcare insurance. So we face, like many other school districts, some very difficult challenges managing a self-insured health plan. We are legally responsible for all the financial risk involved in paying for the claims, which insures over 11,000 employees and dependents. Over the last 3 years, our medical expenses have exceeded the contributions, resulting in a declining fund balance, which is not sustainable over time and has resulted in a significant shortfall. Our projected health insurance trust fund shortfall is $25.6 million, and that is comprised of $13 million, which is 60 days worth of costs to be available to pay claims, and $12.6 million, which is the amount of our expenditures that exceed our revenue. Because Brevard Schools' expenses have grown less than the 6% national average, our superintendent's insurance advisory committee forecasted a negative trust fund balance of $10.5 million. And this has been the number they've been working diligently towards to help resolve the deficit. On May 14th, the SIAC delivered the listed recommendations to the superintendent, and the total projected savings and or revenue, if it comes to fruition, comes to approximately $5.8 million. So at a minimum, the board must address the $4.7 million reoccurring shortfall for FY 2021 in order to remain solvent. So as we move into next year, this is a list of our current minimum budget requirements. And the first one is the cost of the opening of Viera Elementary School, and this is the cost of their staff. We have to continue to fund the longevity differential, security cost increase of our SROs to keep our schools safe, and again, the health insurance trust fund of $10.5 million. And so that is our projected total budget deficit today. And if our potential health insurance fund savings per the SIAC recommendation come to fruition, the $5.8 million, we will have a minimum projected total budget deficit of $7.1 million starting the year. And for challenges, I will recap these areas. And this is a picture, again, of a little girl that this was her first day of kindergarten. And again, we have to ensure that we make every child feel important, because you only get one first day of kindergarten, you only get one first day of going to school. So we have to make our schools safe, and we have to make them great. As we look at FY 2021, we not only have to address the realities of the pre-COVID enrollment decline, but we must quickly assess the impact of the COVID on enrollment as we open schools this fall. Lawmakers passed language that increased the employer rates for the Florida retirement system. The FEFP calculation does not include specific revenue source to offset these costs. So our estimated portion, as we talked about on the earlier slide, is $5.2 million. Ultimately, these areas drive us to budget cuts in order to address employee compensation and our self-insured medical shortfalls. The COVID-19 implications are still uncertain, and we may learn more as the back to school staff works through their plan. But one thing, the only thing that is certain is the uncertainty, actually, that we face this coming year. And we need to posture for a potential mid-year reduction, like Mr. Collins discussed. What our state's budget can afford is a very real concern, and that has to be addressed. So the March 19th conference report is expected to be delivered to the governor soon. Again, we're final countdown. We got 14 days before so it's supposed to be delivered to him soon. And as July 1st draws near, it's more likely that the governor will take the budget as is and possibly use a series of line item vetoes, but he can only really veto things like single member projects. He can't veto the education budget because it's just too large with all the calculations. So it's kind of a take it or leave it. You know, there really, you can't revise it without a special session. So the concern will be, so most likely, in my opinion, we'll go into this school year with this budget. The concern will be, will it hold up? Will we be able to hold on to those dollars, or will we experience a mid-year reduction? And the mid-year reduction, as Mr. Collins pointed out, is not unusual. During the Great Recession, 2008, we received 2 mid-year reductions, and it was $12.8 million, and that was about 2.24% of the budget back then. So if we had the same percentage, that would be about $13.8 million this year. So we would have to absorb a $13.8 million, or we could potentially have to absorb that kind of caliber of a number at mid-year. The state's March tax revenue was down by $800 million, but they did have, in their January-February projections were up about $200 million, so kind of down $600 million in March. The next big major report, they call it the May report, will come out on June 25th, and that will report the April tax revenue, and that is expected to be down more than the $800 million because that's when we were under lockdown, right? So we'll see what that looks like. And then the state will have a better picture of the revenue they may lose and then the factors to the equation that they need to see if they can get through. So they're going to take a look at CARES Act funding. They're going to look at their reserves. They're going to look at line item vetoes, and they're going to see if they can save this budget. Got 14 days to see what happens. And what we do know is they have about $5.9 billion in untouched CARES Act money, and they have about $4.6 billion in state reserves offset. Now, you know, if they were to use all of their reserves this year, then that would cause concern for the following years because they would have to replenish their reserve. So as we consider all these challenges, we must actively manage our overall financial condition. I believe it is necessary to hold back as much savings and reserve funding as possible until at least mid-year while the state fully assesses its financial health. I think I covered that slide. Any questions? And then we talk about the CARES Act update. There's a lot of talk about CARES Act, and CARES Act is just huge, but the main portion that we are concerned about or we're receiving is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. And this is, we're projecting it to be between $14 and $15 million after we find out more from the non-public schools if they opt in or not. And this funding gives us a lot of flexibility, broad discretion in use. We can use it over 2 years, so we can use it strategically to cover immediate needs, to make sure that our children are getting the education that they need and to accelerate and get caught up, those kind of things, as well as ensure they're safe, and then have money we can use in the next year to make sure that we protect jobs and make sure that we have stability. The one thing I do want to hammer home is this is 1 year money, or this is one-time money, I should say. And so it's meant to fill gaps. It's meant to build a bridge over maybe the next 2 years, but it is 1 year money. It will not solve some of the issues that Dr. Mullins is working with for funding that we will need over the years. And then you can see here the current priority areas that we plan on using this funds for: academic enhancements, technology, health and safety, and workforce stabilization. And again, I recommend that we hold steady on much of the CARES Act funds until we have a better indication of the financial health of the state. This will protect our classrooms and the workforce if we do receive a reduction mid-year from the state. And then from here, Dr. Mullins is going to take over.
Lisinski, if I could, just before, as Dr. Mullins is approaching and you're transitioning, I just want to thank you for your student-centered approach to all of the financial information. It's very much appreciated. Welcome to the team.
Thank you, Ms. Belford, and members of the board, and I'll extend my thanks to both Rick and Cindy for their work to bring this information, but also the work they've been doing behind the scenes every day with staff to manage a rather volatile financial environment and try and be grounded and sound in the decision making and in the preparations, while also being proactive and trying to position Brevard Public Schools responsibly with our financial standing and our financial future. I'll add just a couple other comments to CARES Act before I move on to the next budget. I don't think Cindy mentioned, we received the CARES Act application on Friday. It is due by June 30th. So we quickly met yesterday. I want to extend thanks to Dr. Sullivan is putting together a team of staff that will be overseeing the CARES Act funding and the implementation and so on. Met with her for a short time yesterday afternoon, and we began thinking about how do we be forward thinking with the funds to support our kids, to make sure that we can give them every structure we can, every learning opportunity we can coming back in the fall, anticipating some gaps, but also be responsible with the funds in preparation for the future. I want to take a moment and also clarify the governor made several announcements on Thursday about additional funding for K-12 education. The allocations that he referenced were from the governor's allocation of CARES Act, not our CARES Act dollars. So the allocation that you see here, the projected $14.5 million, that does appear to be Brevard's allocation, and we have virtually the autonomy to direct and utilize those dollars. The specific dollars that Governor DeSantis discussed and presented last week, those are out of his pot of CARES Act dollars from the federal stimulus. We received on Friday an anticipated projection of $1.6 million, for example, for this summer academic enhancement proposal or grant that he introduced on Thursday. And again, our elementary team is looking at how might we utilize those dollars, but it comes with a lot of restrictions and expectations and so on. And then we're waiting to hear where the other allocation dollars will fall and impact Brevard. But again, they come with a lot of directed mandates for the utilization of those dollars as we move forward. Robin Ward, our grant coordinator, has indicated that every day she looks to see if another DOE toolkit has arrived in reference to the CARES Act funds and future funds. So we'll keep the board apprised as we learn more moving forward. So now I'd like to move into how are we going to address our budget reduction situation, or our budget shortfall situation with reductions moving forward, particularly as we're facing a new environment with COVID-19. But I want to begin actually with the board's charge several months ago now in looking at a plan towards increased compensation. And that began with a look or an analysis of particularly areas that we could save money in going forward. Little did we know we were going to be facing a difficult financial year, or certainly had no indication or conception of what a global pandemic would involve. One of the areas we looked at was our dual enrollment program. It was suggested, do we need to, and should we be spending the money on dual enrollment? Our dual enrollment program across the district, I would suggest, is one of envied across the state. But nevertheless, dual enrollment is not an area where we can make cuts because it is a statutory requirement in Florida state statute. We do spend approximately $4 million annually on our dual enrollment, ultimately saving students and their families at least that equivalent of college tuition. I would remind the board and share with our community, how do we know the effectiveness and the impact of our dual enrollment program? Well, for the second year in a row, Brevard Public Schools has graduated over 400 seniors who walk across the stage and earn their high school diploma while also earning an AA degree from Eastern Florida State College. That is in large part because of our commitment, our engagement, our partnership with Eastern Florida State College to provide our students a robust access opportunity to avail themselves to college courses. And we've created a real cohesive pipeline and journey for our kids to be able to acquire that while they're in our schools for high school. How do I know it's better than others across the state? Well, I will compare us to another district south of us that starts with the letter B. That's 2.5 to 3 times our size. And the last calculation I received, they had, when we had 434 graduates with an AA degree, they had 250. So that gives a comparison of the impact of our dual enrollment program. One of the other areas we were requested to look at and analyze is what would be the financial impact of going from 6 of 7 periods a day in our secondary schools to 5 of 6 periods a day for students. And actually, it's a little counterintuitive because the expectation or the anticipation is that if we reduce the number of courses that our students are required to have and the number of courses that teachers would teach, we would need fewer teachers. But actually the opposite is true because 6/7 versus 5/6 is a larger percentage of students being taught by teachers. So we actually, in a 6 of 7 model versus a 5 of 6 model, teachers have more students. Therefore, we need fewer teachers. So if we were to transition to 5 of 6, it would actually cost the district additional money because of the need of additional teachers, approximating about $2.3 million. Now, you'll see at the bottom the actual calculation of how that is determined so that our public understands exactly how that is calculated. Just as a reminder, if we were to reconsider a 5 of 6 day compared to 6 of 7, it would require graduation requirement changes. We currently have a 26 credit graduation requirement for our students because they are eligible to earn up to 28 credits. If we were to go to 6 period day, students would only be eligible to earn up to 24 credits, which is the state graduation requirement, but it would eliminate opportunity or access to other programs like CTE, performing arts, and academic electives and others because they would not have the additional periods which to take classes in. But I must acknowledge that a 5 of 6 period day for our teachers is certainly a work condition improvement because they'd have less students, fewer students overall, resulting in fewer papers to grade and so on. But the 6 of 7 structure does provide exemplary opportunities for our students, and I just want to express my appreciation and shout out to our teachers for making these opportunities available to our students. That makes us a leader in the state. Yes, ma'am. I'll just repeat your question for the public so that they know. Ms. Deskovich asked if the average teacher's salary cost of $56,000 is reflective of our average teacher salary. Actually, this was done early in this school year, so it actually may have gone up a little bit since then because I believe this was created before we finalized this past year's compensation, so it might be just a little bit higher. Yes, it's inclusive.
Includes the fringe.
It is inclusive of fringe. The other structure or potential budget savings option we analyzed was a 4-day school week. Interestingly, this was obviously this was pre-COVID. In fact, a shorter school week or work week, eliminating a Friday or a Monday, would save the district approximately just under $1 million. That savings would come from reduced expenses in transportation, primarily, and some utilities savings cost across the district. However, it is nominal when considering the impact to our community and for our students across the district. We've listed there on the left some of the pros to a 4-day school week and then some of the cons or the challenges presented with this concept on the far right. Probably one of the largest drawbacks is the length of school day that would be required, particularly for our middle schools, which would extend the middle school day beyond 5 p.m. in the afternoon. And then with transportation, it would be getting students home, between approaching 6 o'clock in the evening. Given the nominal savings that this would present and the impact to our community, we did not pursue this as a cost-saving option. And you'll note that as we looked at it this year, implementation would not reasonably be possible before the 2021-22 school year. Another school model that we analyzed and studied was presented by a community member called multi-track, or the 4-track model, which is a year-round calendar that divides the entire student body and staff into different tracks. Now, it's important to note that this is not the traditional year-round school model where the same cohort of students have 3-week periods off in between quarters throughout the school year, and they attend all through the summer. The 4-track model actually utilizes the schoolhouse for the months during the summer to add a 20 to 30% greater student capacity in that school. So we would expand the school year, but only 3/4 or 75% approximately of the students would be attending the school at any one time. And every quarter, 25% of the student body would then go on their break or intersession. It maximizes the utilization capacity of our schools. The savings comes in, you don't see an exact dollar amount of savings because the savings comes from the consolidation of schools to then grow other schools. So it would be dependent on how many schools could be consolidated to increase the capacity, and the savings would come from not needing to fund schools, the schools that would have been consolidated. Some of the challenges that come with this concept is it eliminates any opportunity to get into schools to do maintenance when students aren't there. The board, if you'll recall, we are currently in the midst of 17 large capital improvement projects or renewal projects this summer across our districts, about 15% of our schools right now. It does not provide extended time for large facility improvements and projects normally completed over the summer. It does provide a considerable disruption to our community. As we analyze this, it would be very difficult to consider a 4-track model for high schools. It is a feasible model for K-8 or elementary and middle schools. However, 25% of the students would be on an intersession every quarter, and it would ultimately result in district-wide attendance boundary changes because we'd be consolidating schools, as well as there is the potential, particularly for a family with 3 or 4 children, that their children could be on staggered intersessions, making some of the care and support for their children increasingly difficult. As I shared this concept or this model with the Community Ambassadors Council that I was meeting with since October, well, up until, in person, up until our school closure, and then I've continued to meet with the Ambassadors Council virtually since then, this did not emerge as necessarily as a model that the council felt the community would necessarily consider as a first option for either budget savings or as a revenue increasing option. So that brings us to the budget challenges we face this year. The options that I presented so far have not necessarily realized opportunity for us for the 2021 school year. Even the 4-track model, which could present some considerable savings for the district, would require significant preparation and planning for implementation, and at the very earliest could not be realized until the 2021-22 school year. So I began a journey with staff to analyze our budget and look at how are we going to meet our budget responsibilities and address the shortfalls for this year, working with Ms. Lisinski and her staff, of course, as well. I want to take the board and for our viewing community back to a slide that was shared at the last budget workshop. That gives a snapshot of the work that this district has done over the last 5 years to address budget revenue increases ultimately to the operating budget, but also recognizing the impacts to the organization over time. What you see here is 4 different years over the last 5 years where explicit budget reductions and cuts were made, or transfers from the operating budget to the capital budget were made, freeing up revenue. So you'll see down the first column is the description of the items that were cut or transferred. And then in the second column at the bottom, you'll see cumulatively over $11 million has been transferred to the capital budget. And the next column, you see personnel and staffing impacts totaling $9.4 million in freeing up revenue for the budget. And then in the next column, operating budget, cumulatively over the last 5 years, we have made over $6.1 million of cuts to our operating budget that essentially has freed up revenue for, ultimately we have prioritized over the last few years employee compensation. So essentially these dollars have gone and been committed to employee compensation, totaling almost $27 million over the last 5 years for our budget. And this is exclusive of this current year. I commend the work that Cabinet and the district has done over the last several years to continually analyze and dig into our budget to identify resources that can be capitalized or utilized for compensation. But as we continue to cut our budget to meet expenses and address priorities, it does come with a cost. When we continue to impact personnel, we are impacting ultimately the level of service we provide to our students and the level of service we provide to our families and community with our work. So as we move forward, as the board already knows, and I trust the community will understand, the additional budget cuts that we had to address this year just continue to address that level of service and ultimately critical programs and personnel that we've had to make very difficult decisions for. So to begin, I'd like to give the board and the community an overview of how we are addressing the minimum $7.1 million budget shortfall going into next year. First, we calculated or estimated the potential retiree attrition. This has been a calculation we've used for the last few years. Last summer, we shored up this calculation and created a business rule for calculating retiree attrition. Now, I will say that this is a projection at this time because we're not completely through the employee retirement process window, which would obviously continue into past July 30. So this is a projection, but we believe that it is a reasonable and sound projection of $1.5 million. The board may recall that the last 2 years, that retiree attrition was actually approximately $3 million. However, we were coming to the close of that window of the drop incentive retirement of about 5 or 7 years ago. And we're now coming out of that window, so the number of retirees is starting to reduce, which is why we see a lower estimate for retiree attrition this year. Senior Cabinet worked again, diving into department and division budgets as well as contracts. And I commend them for their work and the additional $1.3 million that was reduced from their budgets going into next year. At the same time, we analyzed and reviewed all of our academic programs to see if there weren't savings opportunities within the programs we were providing. And we identified programs such as advanced placement and found ways that we could save money there without taking opportunity away from our students. We analyzed students who were going into Florida Virtual School and how we might enhance our Brevard Virtual School program, and by increasing course sections availability for our students, we actually realized about $300,000 savings by increasing that program. As well as we analyzed FTE earning accelerated programs like ACE, Cambridge, and IB, and identified additional revenue that the district could utilize for covering administrative expenses or the operating budget, for a total academic program savings of approximately $1.1 million. We did make the very difficult decision of analyzing again our regional busing program in preparation for meeting our budget needs. As the board knows, we've been having to evaluate our regional busing program. And as we faced financial difficulties in the past, leading to the unfortunate but necessary elimination of regional busing, we find ourselves today with financial challenges that are also compounded with operational challenges with reopening schools that present specifically in the planning for transportation services. Last year, while maintaining approximately 32 buses and routes for regional busing, we experienced a consistent shortage of 17 drivers across the district. This resulted in daily route consolidation, often maximizing bus capacity and causing regular late arrivals. Today, as our reopening task force works through the many details of reopening schools and establishing universal precautions, our bus utilization is being evaluated and looking to reduce capacities on buses versus maximize capacity. So given our current financial and operational challenges, I must recommend the elimination or suspension of regional busing service to adequately and responsibly provide our required bus service to over 20,000 students across our district every day. And I want to assure our community, I know this will not be well received by our parents and our families that take full advantage of our choice programs and our choice schools across the district. And no, this is certainly not something that I or we want to do, but we are in a position of something that we must do to address our current circumstances. In addition to that elimination of service to our students and families, we're also facing the elimination of both non-school-based positions across the district as well as many school-based positions. The board is aware, and we've already reached out to our media assistants in our schools and made them aware that we will be transitioning out those positions or transitioning the elimination of our media assistant positions across our schools, both in elementary and secondary, over the course of this year. We will provide them the stability of employment this year as we work closely with each of them through our Human Resources Department and seek other employment opportunities for them across our organization. We currently have 72 media assistant allocations with 4 of those positions currently vacant, which will not be filled as we transition out those positions in the coming year. The savings of the non-school-based positions and the school-based positions is approximately $4.5 million, accumulating a total recurring savings of approximately $9.6 million. In the next slide, I want to provide the board and the community a closer look at the non-school-based and school-based positions that we have, that we are prepared to eliminate. I want to emphasize here that at this time, we have prioritized maintaining workforce stability and have not instituted any layoffs at this time and will not have to with these eliminations. The eliminations you see are either through attrition or they're positions that are currently vacant, as I instituted a hiring freeze back in January, February of the middle of the school year. In addition, there are some positions that are being funded for a year out of our anticipated CARES Act dollars to ensure that we can provide the workforce necessary to greet and meet our students with all the supports they need. For example, you'll see the elimination at the bottom of teachers on assignment positions as well as instructional assistant positions. We will fund the TOA positions out of CARES Act this coming year, as well as at least 10 of the instructional assistant positions. But the positions will be transitioned out in future budget years. But this year we have the support of those positions through CARES Act to provide additional stability as our schools greet and meet our students with high quality service. So here we come back to our current position and a summary of our standing. As Ms. Lisinski presented, we start this budget year with a $1.2 million deficit. Our known expenses going into the year approaching $13 million. We are anticipating work with our union groups, keeping in mind that any changes to insurance plan design or premium changes must be bargained with our collective bargaining units, Brevard Federation of Teachers and the United Alliance 1010 union groups. But it has the potential of garnering up to $5.8 million of savings, leaving us with a minimum budget deficit to address of $7.1 million. With the total recurring savings that I've presented, that would position us with a remaining recurring savings of approximately $2.4 million. And those dollars would be used to address potential future enrollment uncertainties, any additional health insurance plan needs, compensation considerations for employees, and or any potential mid-year budget adjustments from the state. Now I'd like to take a few minutes and brief the board and the community on our non-recurring fund balance as we have taken the time to project what that would look like. So any additional non-recurring salary and non-labor lapse identified at a later date will be reserved for the enrollment fluctuations, mid-year holdback, and so on. The figures you see here, some of them are estimates, particularly the salary lapse. For the first time, we did a deep dive look at our salary lapse earlier than we have in the past and calculated what that would be through June 30. Let me explain what a salary lapse is for, I know the board is aware, but for our watching public. Salary lapse comes as a result of positions being vacant for a period of time, positions that were not filled, as well as when a person leaves the organization and we rehire a position and the new person may come in lower than the previous person in that position. So it all creates what is called salary lapse non-recurring savings. So our estimated savings is approximately $7.4 million. In addition, I've made the board aware that we have been capturing COVID-related savings, things like substitutes, utilities, transportation fuel costs. And every year, we capture what are considered one-time savings through dollars that are not expended throughout the year. So our estimated captured one-time savings, including COVID-related savings, is approximately $5.9 million for a total non-recurring savings of $13.3 million. I know the board is very aware. For our public, we have a recurring health insurance trust fund annual commitment of $3.1 million. That must come off the top of any non-recurring fund balance. That has been in place since 2015, and we're obviously obligated to that commitment. In addition, it's been an ongoing practice of the district that workman's compensation has exceeded what is budgeted. So $2.9 million on average has been committed to that expense out of fund balance at the end of the year. In addition, I am recommending that $1.7 million be utilized to cover salaries of media assistants as we attrition or transition out those positions throughout this year. In addition, recommending we make a health insurance trust fund one-time contribution to offset the declining fund balance in our insurance plan of $5 million. So the savings of 13.3, taking away those allocations and expenses, leaves a $600,000 non-recurring fund balance at this time. Obviously, we've been faced with very difficult decisions and very difficult challenges financially that none of us foresaw a year ago when we were going into a budget, and certainly went into a very favorable and positive compensation year for our employees as a priority for the 1920 school year. These decisions have become increasingly difficult as we're going into now the 6th year of budget reductions that will total over $35 million. But I want to assure the board and our public, as we have made these difficult decisions and brought forward these recommendations towards our budget for next year, that our number one priority has been to protect an excellent education for our children, for all of our students, every one of our students, while also protecting and supporting an effective workforce, because we know the service and the experience we give our kids is directly dependent on the workforce that we can put before them and around them. But we have a responsibility, an obligation to both maintain fiscal strength for the district as well as protect our taxpayers' interests. And those have been our driving forces as we have walked through the very difficult challenges we're facing for next year, and as we move ahead to ensure that we maintain the highest quality of education and learning opportunities for every one of our students, pursuing excellence as our standard, while also meeting our financial and fiscal responsibility. Finally, I would share with the board the timeline or the schedule for adoption of the budget. There'll be an advertisement of the tentative budget later in July, and then the first public hearing on the budget on July 30th. Just a reminder that that actually is an evening meeting, with the final public hearing on September 10th. Of course, there is some element of adjustment because we have not received a final budget from the state. We do anticipate the governor to be signing the budget in the coming days. I've heard offline that the governor is a day or two away from signing the budget. So it could be, I suspect, even this week. We've not received strong indication that there will be negative impacts any further negative impacts to the budget, but then again, I've received no official word as well. At this time, I make myself, Ms. Lisinski, Mr. Collins available for any questions that the board may have.
Any board member have any questions for the budget discussion? Zaskovich, was that a yes?
working now? Oh, I do not have any questions, but Dr. Mullins, I am thoroughly grateful for the work that's been put into this. I've been on the board 4 years now, and I don't think I've ever sat through a budget presentation that was so well done, so concise, so clear, so thorough. I'm sure others agree with me. We've had some struggles, obviously, in the past with numbers and fungible numbers, and the community has come after us on that a little bit, and we've taken some heat, but I am extremely grateful for the work that has gone into this. And not only that, I feel like you incorporated in this